You're part of the team that supported the Seahawks to their Super Bowl victory.
So I've been with the Seahawks for several seasons, and after changing their sleep habits, we found a 9% improvement in performance. What fans don't always see is that
you work with MLB and NBA and Olympic level athletes.
Yes, but whether you're an elite athlete or you're a working professional, a student, everyone has that ability to perform better.
What does the day-to-day with the Seahawks look like for you?
The conversations actually start in the off season. There's many people that still think that badge of honor of you should be fine on 4 to 5 hours and that's it, or I'll sleep in the off season.
But just imagine what they're leaving on the table. Sleep 101.
A lot of good stuff happens when we're sleeping, and you can feel more alert. You can have less fatigue. You can sprint faster. That is why I highly recommend naps.
Wow, okay.
There's a lot to unpack here. And then there's that special window between 4 to 8 o'clock where performance is enhanced. So that's when you see the biggest benefit.
So the 3-step framework for sleep.
These habits can make a huge transformative difference in your life. So first,
I can't wait for you to hear this episode with Dr. Cheri Mah, the sleep physician for the Super Bowl-winning Seattle Seahawks. But before we hear from her, can you do me a favor? Hit subscribe and become a part of our growing community. By joining us, you'll get more insightful conversations like this to help you step over your next line. Dr. Cheri Mah, welcome to the line.
I'm excited to be here.
We were talking offline how we kind of go far back. I was helping the Toronto Blue Jays integrate technology into their environment, and you were working with them as their sleep physician, I believe, at the time, helping them understand how to leverage sleep. So it's so fun to reconnect here. I can't wait to get into this discussion. You are really world-leading sleep physician and research scientist, and did a lot of the seminal work around sleep and performance. So just thank you for all of your good work in this space.
No, excited to see the momentum and the respect that sleep is starting to gain over the last couple of years, since it's such an underutilized area of performance enhancement. So thrilled to dive into it and get to share more about what has happened recently and where we're going with sleep.
The Seahawks. I'm so excited to talk about that. Congratulations. You're a part of the team that supported the Seahawks to their Super Bowl victory. I have to say, I'm from New England. I was at the Super Bowl. So it was so painful for me. Maybe start there. East Coast, West Coast. Talk about what the data say about teams traveling to the West Coast. And in this case, the Pats coming to the Seahawks. What kind of advantage did the Seahawks have in this scenario?
Yes. Well, thank you. It was a thrilling season for that matter. And obviously it capped off with this win. I apologize to the Patriots fans there, but for the Seahawks fans, it was absolutely thrilling and so rewarding to see so much time and effort put in from a whole year to see it play out and for them to win the Super Bowl. So amazingly special to be part of this team. And, they did it. So I'm so thrilled.
Yeah.
To your question about East Coast, West Coast travel. Yes. So there have been studies that have shown the circadian misalignment of professional sports teams can impact game outcomes. The more famous study, the Monday Night Football study, showed that when East Coast, West Coast teams play each other, specifically during night games, this is regardless of if the game is played on the East Coast or played on the West Coast, that if you bet on the West Coast team, you would beat the Las Vegas point spread 68% of the time. And that's huge. Now, the reason why, is because there's that special window between 4 to 8 o'clock in the evening, approximately this 4-hour window where performance is enhanced. That's when world records are set. That's when athletes perform their best. So if you play closer to that window, there will be an advantage. So again, regardless of where the game is played, when you have an East Coast, West Coast team playing night games, the West Coast body clock is playing closer to that window. Now, I will say in the context of the Super Bowl, it's a little less relevant because Super Bowl week is special. Both teams typically fly out a week before the game so that they have, a whole week of preparation, of media, of a lot of other things that happen during Super Bowl time. That is different than the regular season when typically teams fly out 1 day, 2 days in advance. So it was less relevant in this case when Boston and the Patriots are coming out to the West Coast, because they really should have had their body clocks adjusted within 3 days of coming to the West. But it's still an interesting, nuggets of information that really could impact performance outcomes.
If you're, switching over inside of 3 days, from East Coast to West Coast, but a lot of folks, it takes longer than that to really adjust. So when you look at the team on average, would you say that even after 7 days, like there's some lag physiologically in terms of like they're not quite back to neutral, back to their baseline?
So I think there's a couple of factors. One is how many time zones you're crossing, right? And if you're crossing 1 time zone, 2 time zones, it's less of a physiologic change than obviously 3 time zones. There definitely the research supports the 3 time zone change has the robust impact on performance outcomes and performance metrics. I think kind of anecdotally, a lot of people feel that jet lag, particularly that first day and that second day when they travel. And generally, people will say, I kind of feel like I'm back to myself within a couple of days. Now, what the science says is that is 1 day per time zone that it takes to really acclimate to the new time zone. So depending on how far you're traveling, if it's 3 time zones, that's going to be about 3 days. If you're thinking about international travel, obviously it can be much longer, where people probably feel relatively normalized, but physiologically they haven't actually caught up to what they need to be. Now, when it comes to the Super Bowl, we're really dealing with just 3 time zones, regardless of where the two teams are coming from. And again, they typically go out the whole week before, so it's less of an issue. And there's typically the bye week for some teams, depending on how the games shake out. But the Seahawks had a whole bye week even in advance of Super Bowl week. So they had some additional recovery time there.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. They look good. In your time with the Seahawks, can you describe just what does the day-to-day kind of look like? Are you popping in on, weekly? Are you kind of using the data to inform how you focus your communication or education? Yeah, just curious how you approach it.
Great question. I will say, without disclosing a lot of the details of exactly what we're doing there, of course, education is an important component of making sure that the athletes, the coaches, the staff, front office understand the importance of sleep, are on board with obviously some of these strategies that we're trying to encourage with the players. Now, a lot of my efforts, are not just the week of the Super Bowl, right? That's a special time. This is a whole year-long journey to get athletes to really, embrace, understand, adapt, and try to modify what their plans are around their sleep so that we can get them to be as best rested and ready to go when it matters most. Day to day, it can be very variable, to be quite honest. There's individual players, of course, but then there's aspects of travel and scheduling that are handled from an organization standpoint. And the different areas that we really build out a program are going to be, they're going to be different at different times of the year as well.
I think for you to go in and do what you did with the Seahawks over the course of the last few seasons, you can't just it's not just buy-in from the athletes. You have to have buy-in from at an organizational front office level, right? That, from my experience, that's the only way it works. What was that buy-in like? How hard was it? What did that kind of look like for you?
You hit the hammer on the nail where, it's, I have found to be more effective working with organizations where it is, sleep is supported from all levels, where, if you have front office and management on board, you have head coach and the coaching staff are supporting the message and can echo that when they find appropriate, such as when they're traveling or during team meetings, then they don't hear it just from myself as the sleep consultant or the sleep specialist. And then you have staff on board from every team looks different, but if you have nutrition, sports psychology, strength and conditioning, athletic trainers, the performance director, right? If you have a lot of the other providers who are essential pieces, but they also hear these questions about sleep and sleep overlaps with their area expertise. If everyone is echoing that message and making sleep an important part of the culture of the team and organization, that's where I found individual athletes and then organizations as a whole flourish more when it has this holistic approach rather than just focusing solely on the individual player. And that's it, right? And of course that matters, right? The vet is different than the rookie, and there's a lot of differences with individual players. But to your point, it's having support and actually having it echoed from others that I've definitely realized is such a critical piece.
In organizations where you don't have as much support, have you been able to kind of influence and, get people energized about sleep? I mean, a lot of what you have to do is get people to buy in and get them excited about this thing called sleep. So I wonder how you sell that, I suppose, to maybe skeptical folks who see non-sleep as a badge of honor.
I am constantly trying to continue to educate and sell sleep as a weapon and show individuals just how much of a performance benefit it can have. I really try to message that sleep is a positive performance enhancer. And I think that has gone over well in terms of motivating both individual athletes, but connecting with staff, coaches, because everyone is really driven by the performance side and are willing sometimes to take that first step when you're there messaging that this is something that could make them feel better, healthier, have a longer career, and it's a positive benefit rather than, looking at all the detriments. That the reality is, yes, when we're sleep deprived and not getting the sleep we need, a lot of things don't function well and we're not our healthiest. But I found that in having these conversations and presentations to educate organizations, that's where I've found more success. But it's a work in progress. And of course, there's many people that still think that badge of honor of sleep deprivation, you should be fine on 4 to 5 hours and that's it, or I'll sleep in the off season. There's still a lot of stigma around it, but I will say that the tides are turning, and I feel that there are more athletes that are vocal and realize how important this is. And so, it's changing, but more to come.
I love it. So just looking, I suppose, over the last few years with the Seahawks, are there any behaviors or trends that you can share? And obviously totally understand if you can't share, but just really curious to know.
Great question. I can't disclose all the details of
I didn't think so, but
the Seahawks. But I think to answer your question, some of the trends that I do see is I will say trends in how receptive some players are, whether it's the Seahawks or actually others organizations I work with, that sometimes it takes multiple touch points and multiple conversations to really connect and find when an athlete is open and receptive to looking and improving their sleep. And it may not be their rookie year. It may not be that next year, but it may be that third year. And as they start to become veterans in the league, as they, start to recognize their bodies are not recovering like they used to when they were 21, or they start to experience a sleep challenge, that's when sometimes they will then be more open to making a change in their habits leading into their wind down routine, or willing to, journal to get some of those racing thoughts out when it wasn't a challenge before. And I do think that that's a trend I've seen with athletes, where it's you have to find the right time and place and meet the athletes where they are. And then if you can get some of those small wins, then that can set you on this path for them to have self-discovery of how powerful sleep can be for themselves, and then are willing to make those additional steps to continue to work with you and see them, thrive.
I think that this is also like an important piece of the framing just around illness and injury, and just how sleep can just pay down that burden in ways that are so powerful. Is there anything that you want to say around that?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating area that hopefully we have more studies and literature coming down the road between injury and sleep. There are some that definitely have demonstrated when we get insufficient hours, whether that's a 6-hour threshold or there's some studies that put it at an under 8-hour threshold, there's an increased risk for injury. And I think the mechanism is not well understood at this point of what specifically is happening that's causing this increased risk. There's some thought, obviously, that there might be some neuromuscular modulation. We know reaction times are slower. We know that you're going to be more fatigued from a mood standpoint. We recognize that the output on performance can be
just energy,
detrimental, or there can be a detriment to performance outcome. The mechanism is not well understood. I tried to take a stab at an exploratory study looking at, well, what is changing? And perhaps it is biomechanically, there are more variability in how athletes move, was what my study started to show when we're sleep deprived, that may be contributing to this increased risk for injury. But I think the bottom line is that we recognize you need to have a foundation of healthy sleep to give yourself the best chance of not getting injured and having as long of a career as possible.
Yeah, I just always feel like, insufficient sleep, you're putting yourself at unnecessary risk, in a lot of ways, especially for these athletes who are really in these high stakes type of competitions.
Yeah. And I think even when you think about those that do get injured, making sure you're getting quality sleep and sufficient sleep duration can be even more essential to give your body the time to repair those muscles and to be able to give your immune function the best shot at being able to decrease inflammatory markers, et cetera.
Right.
And I think anecdotally, some athletes definitely bump up that duration when they get injured, but that's a little more reactive than trying to be proactive and planning for sufficient hours in advance. But such essential components.
What drew me to working at Whoop almost a decade ago was a desire to better understand what happens in the time away from training. It's the time away from practice where recovery, sleep, nutrition, and mental load all play hugely important roles. And now, 10 years later, I'm still committed to that mission. Whoop is a wearable that gives you insight into how your body is responding to life 24/7. It tracks your recovery, sleep, strain, stress, and health biometrics. But what makes it especially powerful is what it teaches you. It helps you understand how small behaviors like sleep-wake consistency, sleep timing, hydration, or alcohol either support or sabotage your health and performance. And with that data, you're able to take informed action. January is always when resolution energy runs high, but we've learned that change often doesn't stick unless it's met with structure and feedback. So if you're looking to build systems to help you show up the way you want, you can sign up for free. It's a 1-month trial at join.whoop.com/science. Okay, so I want to talk about just the importance of sleep. We've kind of hit on some of it, but I think for folks listening, just maybe a quick, sleep 101. So maybe just talk about just the sleep stages. Folks might have heard about it or read about it, but maybe they're not super clear on why each stage of sleep is important and kind of what those stages are.
Sure. Sleep 101. I love it. Okay. So we have several stages of sleep. We have light stages of sleep where you're transitioning from wakefulness into that first stage of sleep called N1. And then you progress into N2. That's the next stage of sleep, which comprises really about 50% of your total night of sleep. And that's when our breathing gets a little heavier, a little bit more regular. We go then into deeper stages of sleep where we know that that's important for muscle recovery, regeneration. You have the biggest pulse of growth hormone during this time. You get more of that deeper sleep in the first several hours of the night proportionally than you do in the last couple of hours of the night. And then you progress into REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep. That's typically when we dream. And you go through this cycle that typically lasts 90 minutes to 120 minutes. And you have about 5 or 6 cycles during the night, depending on how many hours you give yourself for total sleep duration. Yeah. Now, that dreaming sleep we know is important for memory consolidation, emotional regulation. A lot of good stuff happens when we're sleeping, and all these stages are important for different reasons. And the reality is your brain's very smart, and so it knows what it needs. As an example, is if you were getting just a few hours of sleep and really deprived for some reason this week, your brain will go faster into deep sleep and then into REM sleep as it rebounds, knowing what it needs. So that should be a reassurance for everyone that depending on what you've done, your brain is going to adapt.
Where do you see folks struggle with sleep? And you could talk about maybe the athlete population, non-athlete population. Maybe it's the same. Everyone kind of has the same issues. And how do you help folks solve some of those issues that they're having?
We could have a whole pod just on this one question.
I know. It's a big one. So yeah, feel free to cherry pick your favorite parts.
Yeah, let's see. So we'll start with, a lot of individuals struggle with just making it a priority. Right.
Yeah.
There's so many
finding time to sleep.
Exactly. Yeah. There's so many things on our plate that we're trying to juggle between personal, professional life.
Yeah.
If you have kids, you have other stressors. And really, I feel like a lot of individuals are reactive to their sleep. So it's not something they think about in their daily plan. They really jump into bed whenever the day ends, whenever they wrap up all the things that they need to prepare for the next day. And then they get into bed and turn off the lights. And then they don't really know what happens at night, and they wake up and start the day again. And I think that is incredibly common, totally understandable when life gets busy. But I do think that that's an area that a lot of individuals are in this state where they are not necessarily proactively planning how to schedule their sleep, thinking about what are they going to do in that hour before bed to wind down and prepare their brain and body to be in a mindset where they can allow their body to rest. Yeah. A lot of folks aren't thinking necessarily about sleep, for example, in their week. If you know you have an important meeting, presentation, project coming up, and you're going to be short on sleep coming up, are you being strategic and planning ahead for that and trying to get, say, additional half hour or hour in the days leading up to that? Or are you planning to compensate and schedule a short power nap? I think these are places that many of us could do better on, and common for so many of us, whether you're an elite athlete or you're a working professional, an executive, a student. We can all make that shift in that mindset where we're actually being more proactive and investing in your sleep, as the beginning of today.
Your thoughts on chronotypes? I have very strong opinions in this area based on what I know, what I understand of the literature, but just really curious to kind of get your thoughts and how do you work with athletes and non-athletes just around, thinking about this morningness and eveningness?
All right. A lot to unpack here about chronotypes. Yeah. But just to back up, chronotypes, right, is our natural predilection to go to bed and to wake up at a certain time. Some have that earlier preference as morning larks, earlier bedtime, earlier wake up time. Others have that predilection towards later bedtime and later wake up time. Many of us fall in the middle. So that's okay if you feel like you're not an entirely morning or evening person. With chronotypes, I do think that it's underutilized in specifically my athlete population, but for many of us who are not elite athletes and pro athletes in our working day, I think we underutilize how we could better structure our day so that we give ourselves better pockets where we could be more productive and efficient and get a better workout in than what we often force ourselves into certain schedules, often not because we have control of it. Many of us are forced to be morning larks who might be an evening owl by predilection, or just that natural inclination, but we operate, many of us, on an earlier schedule because of work or because of children. I think in sport, it's often underutilized because it's often not always asked, I think, at organizations. And then even if you have that information, making that connection with the decision makers, which are the coaches typically, of how you would leverage that information and would that actually impact how, for example, you would play a player. I don't think the many organizations do. I could be wrong, but right, if you know that you have, as an example, if you have a pitcher that that is a night owl, but he's scheduled to pitch a day game. I don't know if there's many managers that might say, let's change up the rotation here and not
it's going to do the 7 p.m., not the 1 p.m.
on that schedule, despite what the data may say. And I have had a client and an athlete who this was a scenario that he was very concerned with. He knows he doesn't pitch well in the day. He's a night person, but that's just how the rotation every 5 days works. So then you try to figure out, okay, how do we have countermeasures to try to combat, obviously, less of an alertness peak when he has to be at his prime. So I think there's a lot more growth of how to better leverage chronotype within sports specifically, but also for all of us who are not elite athletes, recognizing that there's better windows like the late morning or arguably the afternoon, evening for the evening owls. And that's really when maybe you should be thinking about that important meeting, presentation, project, workout versus the morning larks, leverage that first couple of hours in the morning.
How variable are chronotypes? Like, I think we have this perception that, it's either I go to bed at 3 a.m. or I go to bed at 9 p.m., and it's, I don't know that we're really that variable, right? Like, do you have a sense from the literature in terms of like what that window really looks like?
I mean, that is a more extreme, right? Morning lark versus evening owl. And I think the majority of us actually don't fall on either extreme. Really, many of us are between that somewhere. And I believe that there's more of the general population that falls into that middle bucket than it is truly morning larks, evening type owls.
I wanted to ask you about Kenneth Wright's research. It was a relatively small sample, but he put a bunch of adults who were both evening types, morning types on a mountain in Colorado, no artificial light, and within 48 hours, both evening and morning types were kind of falling asleep, 3.3 hours after the sun went down, within 30 minutes of each other, and kind of they maintained that through the entire camping trip. As it becomes more and more clear to me that the later we go to bed, the tougher it is on our well-being, mental, physical, emotional. I'm just wondering like how kind of hard to be on this line of like, hey, we want to try to shift things earlier because it just has so much benefits in terms of every aspect of our life, including our health span.
And that's a good question. I think part of it is that it'll depend on how much flexibility you have in your schedule.
Yeah.
Right. I think for some folks, that's a luxury to be able to have that shift in when you go to bed and wake up. And not everyone has that ability to do so. If you can, yes, there is, as you've mentioned, some supporting evidence that an earlier clock could be advantageous. And if you have the chance, or maybe even pockets of windows in the time of vacation or other periods where it's less intense of a schedule, you can shift that could be an option. I feel like most people, the lower hanging fruit still is actually sleep duration period. And then even just getting enough time in bed of when they're going to bed and waking up, because so many individuals have such a variable schedule and really can't lock on to a consistent bedtime and wake time. So I feel like that almost is still a lower hanging fruit than really trying to perfect exactly when you're getting
when you go to
hours.
bed. Yeah.
And then you obviously have the whole bucket of quality factors where I think so many people could do much better on small changes there. But to your point, yes, there is definitely going to be that level 2 more advanced interventions of how you can optimize your sleep and circadian rhythm.
And really, a lot of us just have so much limitations and constraints in our lives and schedules that don't allow us to have this kind of consistent sleep-wake time.
Or even just, I would say, weekday, weekend, right, is such a huge swing for so many individuals, and the social jet lag that we often put ourselves through because we think that that's what we want to do with our schedule, but don't think about sometimes the consequences of when we shift our bedtime 3 hours later on that Friday or Saturday night, and then trying to then counter that by sleeping in. It really can have some important consequences.
Maybe just explain what social jet lag is for folks who haven't heard that term before.
All right. Yeah. So social jet lag is such a common experience for many of us, where on typically the Friday or Saturday night, you will go to bed 2 to 3 hours later. A lot of folks want to stay up later and socialize or have other events, and then will wake up 2 or 3 hours later to try and still get the same duration, or maybe even a little bit more on the weekend. But because you have that shifted schedule, your body clock is shifting and feeling like as if you got on an airplane and went 2 or 3 time zones, but you didn't. You were in the same time zone, you just simply shifted your body clock. And you can have the same symptoms of jet lag, like when you travel, such as that fatigue or feeling off, or that GI stomach upset, or just not being able to sleep and wake when you typically would want to. And so that's the term social jet lag, and very common for us.
I've discovered a game-changing tool that I think you'll want to know about. Our sponsor, David, makes these protein bars that deliver a very high protein to calorie ratio. I usually do my endurance workout around midday, which means I often haven't eaten lunch yet. So I'll have a David bar beforehand just to make sure that I have enough energy, and it works like a charm. Their gold bar contains 28 grams of protein, and their bronze bar have 20 grams. Both only have 150 calories with 0 grams of sugar, which you would actually never guess, because honestly, it's like you're eating a treat. My current obsession is chocolate, and I'm not usually one for fruity flavors, but I love the blueberry pie. Because you listen to our show, David is offering you a free carton when you buy any 4 cartons. All you have to do is visit davidprotein.com/line. Or find them at Target, Walmart, Kroger, Wegmans, and the Vitamin Shop stores nationwide. What would you recommend? What are just 3 things that folks can do, when they're traveling to kind of help? And I guess maybe I'll say, maybe if you can split it into 2. So 1, I'm maintaining my home time zone. What are the 3 tips? 1, I want to acclimatize to the new time zone. What are 3 tips?
Great. So first, have a plan.
Yeah.
I think most people have no plan.
No plan. I know. You're right. I have an Excel spreadsheet. I have my own. I've automated my own agent around my travel.
I'm sure you do. You probably. I would love to see how you end up traveling to the max, because I'm sure you have it all figured out. But yeah, no, in all seriousness, like that is literally step 1. Have a plan. I always break it into 3 parts, which is for any trip that you're going on, there's what you do pre-flight, in-flight, and post-flight. And that's a way to make it more obvious that there are strategies you can employ before you even get on the airplane, which is 1, make sure you're not short on sleep before you travel, because sleep deprivation definitely can make that jet lag worse.
Yeah.
And then in-flight strategies. So obviously what you're doing with alcohol, caffeine, usually recommending not to do either of those on the plane.
Right.
Thinking about also, like, when do you eat? When are you actually napping or sleeping? A lot of people don't have strategies around that. They get on the plane and then they either pass out for the whole flight, they stay up the whole time watching TV shows because it's their you time. But you can be more strategic about when you're napping, sleeping, when you're eating, to start to shift that clock, if that is the goal on this trip. And then when you land, of course, there's post-flight interventions. When do you get sunlight or avoid sunlight? Because sun is the biggest, has the biggest influence on your body clock to help you reset and shift to that new time zone. Again, if that is the goal. And then how are you thinking about using caffeine or power nap strategically if you have that dip in your circadian rhythm, but you need to be at your best? You have an important meeting, presentation, you got to be alert. Then how do you leverage that? And Yeah, so that's how I break it down, is thinking about those 3 phases. Now, in your 2 scenarios where you are trying to stay on your current time zone, you want to obviously think about keeping your sleep and your wake schedule on your local time and not shifting it drastically, because then your body clock will start to shift. That can be reinforced with light at the right time. So if you have access to sunlight, then you want to get that sunlight to keep your body clock on your local home time zone. And this question always comes up with like, what if I'm waking up before the sun, or I don't have access to sun? And I do think some of the newer technologies with light therapy glasses can be reasonable options to give yourself the stimulus when needed, even if you don't have access to the sun, or it's more challenging at your destination. So that will be trying to stay on your home time zone, is eating on the same time, getting that sunlight appropriately, and making sure that you can readjust to keeping that schedule when you're in a different destination.
Yeah.
Now, when you're trying to shift to a new time zone, one, yes, it matters. Are you going eastward or are you going westward? But I really advise, if it's within a 3 time zone shift, you can start to shift your bedtime and wake time 2 or 3 days in advance of leaving, so that you're not having to combat a 3 time zone difference. When you arrive, maybe it's only 1 time zone difference. So that's like one of the biggest factors to consider in pre-flight. And the others are also similarly, is knowing where you're going to, trying to adjust your sleep and your nutrition, and sunlight, so that you're going to be able to shift faster than just reacting once you land.
I think that's going to be really helpful for folks. What is the first night effect?
Great question. First night effect. I'm sure most of us have all experienced this at some point in life, where when you are sleeping in a new environment, whether that's a hotel, you're on vacation and you're in different lodging, we often will not get as good quality of sleep in that first night or for several nights in a new location. The left side of our brain literally is not sleeping the same. It's more alert and awake than if we were sleeping in our home environment. The thought is that that's probably a protective mechanism, so that we're ensuring that we can be alert if there's something that could cause us harm or could be a threat. And so it is known that we don't sleep as well those first couple of nights. Now, that can be not that big of a deal if you're staying somewhere for a long period of time, but it could be a big deal if you're only in that new location for 1 or 2 nights and then have to go and play an important game, or you have a big presentation and meeting. And so one way to at least minimize that effect is, I recommend with my athletes and high performers are to bring things that are familiar from home. So whether that's if you use a candle, if you use lavender, if you have a photo, a pillowcase, or if your bed partner, if you have one or is not there, you can bring theirs. Some people like the scent of that being from home. Something that helps familiarize the room can hopefully help minimize that first night effect. And then bringing tools that you may use at home. If it's an eye mask you use at home, bring it on the road. If you use white noise, if you use a certain journal, or otherwise, these are good tools to have that will be the same both when you're at your primary location and then when you are on the road.
One thing that's really clear is like, have a plan, have a plan, have a plan. I love that was like the first thing to recommend. I think given most of us are not always getting the sleep that we need, naps can be just an amazing strategy to prevent some of those dips and make us less reliant on caffeine and stimulants to try to keep ourselves awake. How do you think about naps with both your athletes and your clients?
I love naps. I highly recommend naps.
Yeah.
And keeping them a part of how you plan your day. Strategize them in and literally put them on the schedule if it takes that, effort to make sure that you're going to have the time or that window of opportunity, because it is going to be important to give yourself that extra boost if you're not feeling your best because you just traveled, or if you have an important event in the evening time, to give yourself a little bit more energy and get through the important event. So if you keep them short, I like 20 to 30 minutes is typically what I recommend. That will keep you in lighter stages of sleep. You get the benefit of alertness for about typically 2 to 3 hours, and it won't affect your sleep subsequently at night. Versus I stay generally away from the much longer naps, an hour, 2 hours, where you can go into deeper stages of sleep, wake up with that sleep inertia where you feel sluggish and groggy. And that can last for, half hour, sometimes longer for folks. And that's not the state you want to be if you have to go out and perform. And it can affect your sleep subsequently at nighttime. So I do love naps. I love the Nappucino as well, where you combine caffeine first.
Yeah.
The caffeine starts to kick in within 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And you go take a 20 to 30-minute power nap. Yeah. And then after you wake up, then both will have kicked in. And that's more effective than doing either caffeine or alcohol, or caffeine or the power nap alone. So I don't know if that's a tool that you've used, but I really, love the power nap and the Nappucino.
Yeah, I love the Nappucino too. I think it's just like epic. A little shot of espresso, and then eye mask, earplugs, shut eye, and then you wake up just feeling so good. I think the athletes love that too.
I think to your point too, that the sleep tools that you use are important even for napping, because we often think about just our night sleep and trying to optimize your bedroom. But a lot of us need to take power naps that might be in non-ideal situations, whether that's, in, I don't know. I've seen very interesting places where people take power naps in training rooms and under cafeteria tables, in closets, on a bus. You might find yourself in all different places, but having those small tools like an eye mask and earplugs, are huge. So you can at least eliminate the light and the sound to try to get as quality a nap as possible. And they're
affordable. You can have several, in each kind of, you have one in the office, one in, in your bags for when you're traveling, and then one at home. Yeah, I kind of have them everywhere.
Exactly.
I feel like just when I'm traveling, like on a plane, just taking a quick, that's when I love the Nappucino. I just find it to be so effective. And I end up like getting so much work done after my little power nap when I'm traveling.
I think they're underutilized. And for some people who say, well, I struggle to take a nap, I actually recommend even taking quiet time.
Totally.
And even if it's 10 minutes, there's been studies that short 10-minute naps can be helpful. But even quiet time, give yourself 10, 20, 30 minutes. And the reason also why is there's studies that show when people think that they are awake through a whole nap period, there's studies that have shown that people can actually fall into the first stages of sleep and just be poor judges of that and not realize it. But they actually probably are getting some of the benefits of that lighter sleep, even when they feel like they're just closing their eyes and resting.
I think that's such an important mindset shift, for individuals to recognize that just even that quiet time is so restorative. And I feel like a great gateway to napping is, to your point, just put your earplugs in, your eye mask on, and then just do some mindfulness meditation, some yoga nidra, just listen to a script. And before you know it, you're asleep, and then you're like, oh, wow. I think yoga nidra really, for folks definitely carrying sleep debt, they end up falling asleep during that session. And so I think just setting the alarm so you wake up when you need to wake up, but thinking about it more as a tool just to kind of restore and not getting so caught up on the fact that you're not falling asleep, but that you are actually getting huge benefits from just chilling out for a little bit.
Definitely.
When you think about just this broader message around sleep, what do you really hope folks take away?
I hope that folks take away that investing in your sleep doesn't have to take huge leaps and jumps. That small, gradual changes are the best and can make a difference. And so if I could inspire anyone listening to take 5 minutes to start a wind down routine, or spend 15 minutes right before bed, less scrolling on the phone, and maybe 15 minutes to read a real book or journal or write a to-do list. Give yourself that time for you, and then get 15 minutes more sleep. That will add up. And so I hope that listeners are inspired that it can be small changes that are practical and sustainable as a starting point to grow, and realizing how important this part of your health is so essential for you to really live the happiest, most productive, and thriving life possible. And then the second takeaway, I'd say is I'd want people to just hopefully be willing to try and challenge themselves to change their mindset about sleep. And one of the phrases I like to share is, sleep is not the end of today, but think of sleep as the beginning of tomorrow. And the reason why I really like that framing is that you're going to invest in your sleep tonight to set yourself up for the best possible, most successful tomorrow. And I think we all want that, right? We want to have a great day ahead of us. But making those small changes and investments in your habits tonight really can make a huge transformative difference in your life for tomorrow.
Dr. Mah, thank you so much for your time today. You just are amazing, and really grateful for just your expertise and insight, and all your contributions to science and performance. So thank you for the work you do.
Well, thanks for having me. I loved getting to share more about the work that I'm doing and some of the interesting areas that I think is still to come.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Dr. Cheri Mah is a sleep physician, and she's been in the performance world for a very long time. She did some seminal work on sleep extension with Stanford basketball athletes, showing that the more they slept, the better they played. That was really one of the very first kind of sleep performance studies that showed this association. So she's been in this world for a very long time, and we know sleep matters. It's a massive competitive advantage, the biggest competitive advantage, and she's helping teams leverage it to the fullest. I think folks are just going to find this conversation around how she thinks about integrating sleep protocols into a high-performing environment fascinating. Even if you do a little bit of that consistently, you can find, gains in your own life that are just not at the margins, but could actually be transformational.